I think it's Michael 36 says how, or maybe Michelle, how to understand and deal with a miscarriage. Have you all had any miscarriages?
Haven't. Thank God, man.
We had 2.
Thank God.
They were early on, like not far along, and it didn't affect me.
Yeah. Okay.
It affected my wife.
Yes.
I almost felt bad that I didn't feel how I thought I should feel for her, but I think I knew enough to know that feelings are deceptive and what's the objective reality here and how do I love my wife in this?
Yeah.
But that's also something to wrestle with when you're not actually feeling what you think you should feel.
100. Matt, this is so I sit on this advisory board for a place called the Institute for Reproductive Grief. And they talk, one of their major focuses is miscarriage. And so what's really, the first thing is this: it can feel so lonely and isolating. And I think in the Catholic community, we don't talk about miscarriage very much. And yet it's actually very common. So the statistics kind of vary a little bit, but something like 1 in 4 women will experience a miscarriage. So like 25% of women will experience a miscarriage. That's not a small number. Think about all the women we know in our community who have multiple pregnancies. Like the number of women who have experienced a miscarriage is not small, but it can feel very isolating and lonely. And so I think the first thing to do is let someone know they're not alone. Let someone know that this is not something that they have to go through alone. It's not something that is unique to them. There are people who they can connect to who have had this experience. But the second thing is there's something called disenfranchised grief. And disenfranchised grief is when you experience death or loss and you're not sure whether it's socially acceptable, publicly acknowledged, or socially acceptable to express this grief. And so the grief becomes disenfranchised. You sort of pull it back because you don't know if you're allowed to feel this way. So miscarriage, this is common in miscarriage, right? Because let's say you miscarry at 8 weeks. Well, at that point, the baby's the size of a blueberry or something like this, or, is it okay to be sad when the baby's that small? Or let's say you miscarry, you find out you're pregnant at 4 weeks, you take the pregnancy test, and then you miscarry in the 5th week. Like if the baby's the size of a poppy seed, is it okay to be sad?
Well, one thing I've heard is I know a woman who had 2 children, desperately wanted more and kept miscarrying. And I think people might say to her, well, hey, thank God you've got these 2.
Right.
And that's a way of saying you really shouldn't be as sad.
Don't be sad. Right. Be grateful. Don't be sad. Is it okay to be sad when you haven't yet held that child? Well, like, do people think I'm overreacting? Do people think this is crazy? Can I be sad? Look, I know couples who struggle with infertility and I do already have a child. Can I be sad for losing my 7th? I mean, so this idea of disenfranchised grief, what oftentimes happens is women feel more isolated because they don't know if it's actually okay to grieve. And so I think a couple of things to say are, one, help people find space and opportunity to grieve if they want to and when they're ready to, but to let them know that you're okay and open to that. Oftentimes when people miscarry, we don't know what to say, so we don't say anything. And we'll kind of maybe keep it to we know it happened, but we don't want to. So I think it's okay to say, hey, I'm so sorry. If you ever need anything, let me know what I can do. So that does 2 things. One, that enfranchises their grief. If you're sad, it's okay. And I'm here to listen to it. And 2, you also give them, you're not trying to force, hey, we have to talk about this right now. But you're sort of giving them an agency and saying, look, if you want to reach out, if I can do anything, you let me know. I'll listen if you need somebody to watch the other kids because there's a whole, by the way, physiological dimension to miscarriage that gets, it can actually be traumatic bodily. There can be lots of bleeding. There can be hemorrhaging. Hormone levels are readjusting. It's not just miscarried and over. There's a physiological as well as a psychological component. So I think offering to help, hey, if you need anything, really let me know. Even if you just need an hour without the kids or 2 hours without the kids.
What about on the other side of the spectrum? Suppose there's a woman who's like, I had a miscarriage. I guess I should feel a lot worse than this. But maybe I even feel relieved. Let's take it to that extreme.
It's really
I
complex.
feel relieved because I actually didn't really want to get pregnant, even though I'm a Catholic and I know I should. What do you?
So
how do you speak to her?
Yeah, that's a great point, because maybe two things. I want to address also men in miscarriage, because I think men oftentimes get overlooked because you didn't have the miscarriage. Men don't know whether it's okay to grieve. So I think ultimately including the husband as well and letting him know that this might be something that's really sad or scary or painful for him, and that's okay, and that you see that. Because sometimes I know guys go into sort of protect and provide mode for their wives when a wife miscarries, and their grief gets... And so it's not uncommon to actually see a guy start grieving a year later.
Interesting.
Because they've been so focused on taking care of their spouse. So the time frame can differ between men and women when you start to grieve. But to your point, it gets really complex when we start to feel like relief. Maybe you already feel stretched thin. You've been open to life and you know, been on the fence and not sure if, you know, but you conceive, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be a stretch emotionally, financially. It is not an uncommon feeling for people when they miscarry to feel some relief, especially if you have a big family. It's not uncommon, but what that does is then all this guilt and shame comes pouring in. How dare I feel happy over this? But I think it's important, two things. One, to be really precise about what you're feeling relief over. You're not feeling relief at the death of your child. That's not the relief. The relief is at the release from stress, you know, the release of financial concerns. That's what you're feeling relieved about. Like future struggles. And that's normal. We don't love struggling. We don't love suffering. We're sort of weak, fragile creatures. And so to feel relief that I won't have to suffer is what the relief's over, but it's not over the actual death. And so I think parsing out, because, you know, given the choice, you probably wouldn't choose that actively. Like you probably wouldn't say, yep, if I had a button to press, I would press the terminate button. But if you could press a button to terminate your stress, like press that button, you know, that's where the relief is over.
Really helpful.
I think it's really important. But the second thing is to recognize that it's okay to feel a complexity of emotions. That you might feel relief. And I will say to people sometimes who have miscarried, I might even open that door and say, I wonder if you actually felt a little bit of relief. Because that lets them know I'm open to hearing the fullness of the experience. And then they can begin to sort out, well, yeah, but it's not that my child died. It's that I won't have to worry about paying one more tuition, or I won't have to, or we won't have to buy a new minivan because we're already filled and there's no money to buy a new minivan. The relief is over the material things. And maybe lastly, recognize that grief doesn't have this clear progression. You know, the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, and, you know, anger, sadness, bargaining, you know, whatever, then acceptance at the end. Grief doesn't look the same for everybody, and it doesn't have to. And it doesn't work linearly very often. You know, you sort of ebb and flow between anger and sadness, and then acceptance, and then anger. And that's okay. It's not just a clear, linear, neat process. And I'm in this stage, and this stage, and this stage. That's really helpful. And that's okay. It's okay to allow the process to unfold and to just let it unfold as it unfolds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe or you're a dingus. What's a dingus exactly?
Used to refer to something one cannot or does not wish to name specifically.
You don't have to subscribe, but if you did, I'd love it. You dingus.
Like the video. That's who we're using that one. Take one.